Fixed but not for free, it's the new ROG Ally X from ASUS. Now you may remember I've actually reviewed the previous edition, the ROG Ally, and I loved this device to bits. I thought for the price, at $650, you already have a huge amount of storage, an amazing amount of performance, and just being able to do so much on a tiny little device that runs a full version of Windows and you don't have to deal with the Linux stuff that you have to deal with a Steam Deck. I just loved the freedom of the original Ally. But the question is, do we really need to be spending another $150 more on top of the Z1 Extreme version just to get the Ally X? Well, let's talk about it. Just want to make it clear that this unit was sent to me for the purposes of making this video. I don't have to send it back at the end. They haven't instructed me to say anything specific about it, and all opinions are my own. Now we're going to go into detail about what's actually changed and whether those changes are worth it, but let's start with the most important piece of context. Why do we have a new version of the Ally X, when we only just got this 1 year ago? When the Ally came out, there were numerous reports of issues that maybe the reviewer units didn't have. So the question for ASUS was, do we recall all the products that were faulty and fix them, or do we make a new product and just say that it's much better now, and because it's more expensive and has upgraded features, there won't be as many issues? Now what they plan to do for the original Ally issues, I'm not sure, but it seems that the current solution is to just make a new product that costs more, and as a result, they have more money to spend on redesigning it and hopefully not having as many of those same issues in the new one. And so that brings me back to what I said at the start, fixed but not for free. It's essentially not a new model, but it's priced a bit like offering you a new model. So it's more expensive, but essentially it's the same device as before, but with numerous improvements that you would expect to see in a new version. So in a way you can think of it more like the Ally 1.5 instead of the Ally 2. Which is probably why they've given it a clever name, the Ally X. Now, the main reason it doesn't feel like an Ally 2 is because it's actually got the same processor as the original unit. Now, the original one came in a Z1 or a Z1 Extreme version. I think this only comes in a Z1 Extreme version, so it's the same processor, but it does have 50% more RAM and double the battery. Now, for a handheld, making changes to things other than just the processor can have a significant change and effect on how you experience playing with this handheld on a day-to-day basis. In order to go over what's changed and what I like about the Ally X, let's talk about this, the original Ally, and what I loved so much about it. First of all, the Ally was nice and sleek. They fit so much technology into such a small package, and yet we still get this giant 7-inch screen. And compared to a Steam Deck, it just feels less chunky. I don't really need these massive grips. It kind of forces you to play games like they're all FPS games, and it doesn't really work for me. So fortunately on the Ally X we still get some of that sleekness, but as you can see it has been bulked up a little bit. There's a whole extra layer of bulk over here, and they've also changed the handheld grips, so it's not feeling really as sleek as before, but it is still smaller than the Steam Deck, and that's kind of important to me. It also had a perfectly serviceable D-pad. It wasn't my favorite because I did get some accidental jump inputs on it, so I didn't really use it that much for fighting games, but in general, I was able to play casual games using the D-pad and the analog sticks just fine. Now on the Ally X, we get a much improved D-pad. I have a separate video going to just the D-pad, so if you want to check out that video, I'll put a link here or in the description somewhere. But check that out if you want more details on the D-pad, because the D-pad is significantly better. I think they may have only changed this top plate here, but that was enough to make it so much better. So much happier with the D-pad, and the analog sticks are improved as well. They feel a lot tighter. They feel a lot more like a console pad controller and a lot less like these. I don't know, these feel like they were off the shelf. Another thing the Ally had that many handhelds just did not have was a 120Hz screen, and we still have that screen on the Ally X. As far as I'm aware, it's the same screen, looks the same to me, performs the same way to me, and it's still my preferred screen to play on. Again, my original Steam Deck, 60Hz, the OLED Steam Deck, I believe is 90Hz, but there are not as many handhelds out there with a 120Hz screen, and I love having that, just the performance of a 120Hz screen, even if you're not playing games at 120 FPS. But if you're playing games at 120 FPS, It just feels nice to have games running at double the frame rate and not, I don't know, 50% better frame rate than before. That just feels like a non-integer scale. I don't really like things like that. It's not OLED, but I'm just like, give me a regular LCD panel, and if it's got 120 hertz, then I'm certainly going to prioritize that over having deeper or more vibrant colors. Now, one of the things that's difficult for a Windows-based handheld is they need their own layer of software to make Windows kind of usable on a handheld. Maybe Windows will one day make a handheld mode that actually works, but we still don't have that, and so every creator of these handhelds creates their own little mini software that sits in between Windows and your Steam layer to change things like these macro buttons on the side and just how it behaves with all the shortcuts on it. The ROG Ally uses something called Armory Crate. I'm sure that there are plenty of people who have complaints about that software, but personally it works just fine for me. On other handhelds, I just can't find a way to set a secondary function for this as a home button. On Steam, pressing the home button brings up the Steam Deck sort of OS menu, which is super useful, but on other handhelds just can't do it. Fortunately, on Armory Crate, there is a way to just very quickly just say, hold down this button and press any other button you want, and it will open up the home button, and it just makes using Steam in big picture mode significantly easier. So Armory Crate, exactly the same here on the Ally X, but anyway, I preferred it to other versions of handheld OS software anyway. One more thing I loved about the original Ally was just the fact that it runs Windows. On the Steam Deck, which is a fantastic device, and it's incredible what this thing can do, you just had to jump through other hoops, like, does my software work on Proton Linux? Do I have to run a certain version of Proton? Or like, am I going to run a mod with this game as well? Like in Assetto Corsa, you can run Content Manager. So that peace of mind that you're just running a Windows device is just so much easier than having to look things up in advance. Like, before I buy this game, can I find out which version of Proton makes this work? And then it's like, even if it does work, it's like, but only with Proton GEX Experimental Branch 9.1.7. It's just, I can't be bothered. So Windows on a handheld in many ways is still a headache, but I loved having that flexibility here on the Ally, and of course we still get that on the Ally X. So that's what I loved about the Ally, which is still here in the Ally X, but now let's talk about what has actually improved. Now, in general, a lot of things have changed, but to varying degrees and in ways that some people may not even notice. But for me, one of the biggest ones was controls. So like I mentioned before, I have a separate video going over just the D-pad because this D-pad cover is significantly better than before and it alleviates most of the issues I had with it. So already from the get-go, I can upgrade my Ally from being just my casual games machine that I always go to first to being the casual games machine that I also use for fighting games. I love the D-pad on this. And like I mentioned before, these analog sticks are a little bit tighter now. The face buttons, as far as I can tell, are exactly the same. I cannot really find any difference between them and the old one. A bigger change is on the top of the device where you have the shoulder buttons and the shoulder triggers. These are actually significantly bigger triggers than before and they feel a lot nicer than before. On the previous version, they didn't really feel like they had a throw. They just kind of rotated from a single pivot point. Obviously, these ones are also rotating from a single pivot point, but they've been positioned, it's been positioned differently that it feels like there's a lot more travel to it. You can see we had these massive macro buttons, which I actually really liked, but I did press them by accident every now and then. I suppose there's really no harm in making them smaller because you can still press them just as fine as before. You can also kind of press them from any angle. I like the shape of this dome because it allows you to kind of like push sideways on it and it kind of forces the button to rotate enough that it does actuate properly. And while we're here on the back of the device, let's talk about what they improved in terms of ergonomics. This shape on the original Ally, I actually really loved. They have these weird kind of ridges, which means that whether you're holding it on a table like this or holding out in front of you, you can put your middle fingers on it or you can put your ring fingers on it and have your middle fingers on the macro buttons. However, on the Ally X, as you can see, they've gone for this much more smooth, ergonomic sort of gamepad controller mounds, and I'm just not really a big fan of it because I feel like a shape like this is trying to be a gamepad controller, but it's not really because, like I mentioned in my previous video, they're not a gamepad because you still have to put your hands on the back of this flat device. You can't really wrap your hand around the controller. So I don't really see the point in making these grips on the back that allow you to wrap your hand around the controller when really you can't fully wrap your hand around the controller anyway. So personally, I preferred these sort of hard ridges over here, which just put my hands in exactly the right sort of place to just lock them in place and hold the console nice and sturdy while I'm shifting around and playing fighting games. I feel like these round mounds they have on the back are kind of aspirational. It's like, I wish I was a pad controller, but I'm not, so I just kind of feel a bit like a pad controller. This puts your hand in a pretty good position, but for using the analog sticks. Again, I'm biased because most of the games I play, I like to use the D-pad, puzzle games, fighting games, things that involve a lot of precise digital movement. So an improvement for most people, just not for me. So overall, some big improvements to the controls of the device, but we've also got big changes to the input-output stuff over here. Now, some of this is probably because they had issues on the original Ally with overheating, and it was some kind of affecting the SD card slot or something like that. But in any case, we have a whole extra vent here on the top of the device where we did not have one before. They've also replaced this expansion port here with just a regular USB-C port. This gives you more flexibility. If you're not using a graphics accelerator, you just get two USB-C ports, so you can plug in a charger into one and maybe an Ethernet adapter into the other. Maybe you don't want to use a dongle and have to daisy chain all your devices into the dongle instead. 2 ports is the bare minimum for any device. Let's always put 2 ports on these devices. Headphone jack's been moved to the opposite side. That makes really no difference. SD card slot as well. Couldn't really care less where that is. If it makes it better and it doesn't overheat, then put it over here. Now I know it's in there securely, but I also just kind of like that the ASUS Ally always put the SD card on the top. On the Steam Deck, the expansion card slot is actually on the bottom. Again, I don't think it's ever really going to fall out. It's in there nice and securely, but it just bothers me. It's like, why would you put an open card slot on the bottom of your device? It's just asking for trouble. So super sensible putting it here on top. The power button is in more or less the same place, and it still has a fingerprint sensor, which makes it so much easier to log in without always having to type your passcode or pin code into Windows every time you want to log in. So those are the big changes on the outside, but there have been some internal changes as well. Even though it's got the same processor before, you have 50% more RAM. That will lead to performance improvements, not huge improvements, but if you're always trying to eke out every bit of performance out of your games, you're the type of person that will notice those 5 to 10% differences because of that extra RAM. But one change you will really notice is the battery life. This thing had a 40 watt-hour battery in it, and this one has an 80, in addition to having just better thermal management than before. As a result, this feels a lot like when I'm playing on my Switch. You know when you turn on your Switch, you play a whole gaming session and then you switch over to another game and you look at the percentage and it's like, oh, it's gone down about like 15%. Okay, well, I can still play a huge number of games for the rest of the weekend, no problem. On the Ally, you'd try to do the same thing, but you'd play one game and then when you turned it off, it wouldn't be 15% down on battery. You'd be like, okay, I was at 100% before and now I'm at 33%. Where did all my battery go? It's like, I don't even know if I have enough battery to play another game. It's like, I played my one game, I'm at 30%, I'm at 33%, maybe I should just charge it now. But on the Ally X, with a full charge, when you've played a single game for maybe 30 or 40 minutes, you turn it off, you go to switch to the next game, and you check the battery percentage, and it's like, oh, I've only gone down about 24%. Not bad. I've still got enough battery to play maybe 1.5 other games. So no, it doesn't have the battery life of a Switch, but it's significantly closer to that experience. And in exchange, you get a Windows handheld that can play way more powerful games than you are running on your Switch, and at much higher resolutions and much higher refresh rates. So, some very compelling improvements, but are there any issues that are persisting or have cropped up with the new version? Well, like I said before, I'm not a big fan of these grips, even though I think probably most people will actually like the new grips. The other thing while we're on the back here is this is just less shiny than before. Something about the new device just isn't as exciting as the original one. Just, you can see it very simply here. This metallic stripe just has more of a rainbow effect to it. Now it's kind of more muted, more subtle. Subtle meaning boring. These angular grips on the original made more of a statement, whereas the sort of rounded grips on the new one are like, well, I'm a pad controller, but not. Because the battery has doubled in size, it is also heavier than before. A lot of people will say that it's not that big a difference. It's like 600 grams versus 680 grams. It's not a big deal, but to me, for some reason, it is actually kind of a big deal. It feels a lot heftier than the previous version. I don't know if it's just the weight balance. It also has some weird issues that have just continued to persist. One thing I didn't like about the original Ally is I would put it in standby mode, I would plug in the charger, and then the screen would turn on. Now that may not seem like an issue. You just tap the button and then you would turn the screen off. But that's not how it works. You tap the button and nothing happens. What it really wants you to do is log in and then turn the device off. Anyway, that issue is exactly the same on the Ally X. They've done nothing to fix that. I don't even know if this is really an ASUS problem. This might just be a Windows problem, but it bothers me. Another issue that persists is just because of Armory Crate, and it's because when you're running Armory Crate and Steam at the same time, unfortunately, it can't really figure out which launcher gets priority, and so pressing left on the D-pad or right on the D-pad will press left twice in the actual software. For some reason, it's just like, I'm pressing left in one launcher, but also in another launcher at the same time. And I don't know, it's not really intelligent to know whether you're operating a launcher or running a game. It just kind of gets confused. And the only way to fix it is to switch one launcher off, which makes no sense because to launch a game from Armory Crate, it has to launch Steam to run the game anyway. So Steam like, boots back up and then the interface gets broken. These are Armory Crate issues. But overall, I think my main issue is that even though this device is significantly better in every single regard, it's just less exciting. I think before it was like we put a ton of awesome technology in this sleek package with some interesting, very bold statements that made sense, and just the D-pad just wasn't really that nice, and it had all of those issues with the overheating and the SD card. So instead of just fixing the device and making it look exactly the same as before, they improved loads of stuff, but they also changed various things. Like, basically, it's just kind of bulky and has no character. It kind of looks like the battery overheated and kind of expanded. If you've ever had a device that did that, it's kind of like, oh, my device kind of looks weird and inflated because my battery is about to explode and probably cause a fire or something. It kind of looks like that. It kind of looks like the battery kind of expanded and various components got bloated out of shape. But it's not actually bloated out of shape. It's been redesigned to be bigger so that it can more realistically carry out the task that the Ally was trying to do. It was impressive because they crammed all of this amazing stuff into this sleek package. But the truth is, it was overambitious. They couldn't do it at that price point, and they couldn't do it at this size and form factor. So they bloated it out, they made it a bit bigger, they made it a bit more expensive, and so it's a more realistic device right now. Stuff should go wrong less than before. But as a result, it's just not as exciting. The question is, if I had to choose between getting a cheaper ROG Ally and buying the new one, would I get the new one? And the answer is, I would definitely buy the new one. To me, it's just a less exciting product. I don't really love anything about it because it's just kind of bulkier now and heavier now and doesn't feel as nice to hold now, and it just feels like it's making less of a statement than before. But that stuff ultimately kind of doesn't really matter because the D-pad is better. So I actually like playing fighting games on here. The performance is also better. It just lasts a lot longer. That 50% boost in RAM and also the 100% boost in the amount of battery life in the device. It's just a way better device spec-wise than before. I just don't really love it. So to summarize my thoughts on the new ASUS ROG Ally X, it's way better than before and only $150 more than before. That is a big jump, of course, for many people, but I think those changes are worth it. And if I had to choose between a $500 or $650 Ally, even if I could get one much cheaper on sale, I think I would still spend the extra money and I would just get this one instead because it has fixed a lot of the things that I didn't like before. And in a way, not being able to use this D-pad for fighting games meant that I was kind of using it as a glorified casual games machine. The changes they've made to the Ally X have transformed this into a machine that actually lasts long enough that I can play games without worrying about my battery dying halfway through a session. And I can actually use it for fighting games now because of this D-pad. And that's just on top of the multitudinous other things, like it's got a full HD screen that runs at 120 Hz, which is something that most other handhelds just still don't do. Double the amount of storage as before to 1 terabyte with still a slot here if you want to put an SD card in as well. Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's $150 extra, but when you go back just a few years to before Steam Deck, before these devices really exploded, if you had told someone for $800 you'd be getting all of this in this package, you would have exploded people's brains. So it's just like, we need to put things in perspective. Yeah, it's a price bump, but I think the price bump was worth it because this is a much more realistic package. They can actually deliver you the product that they wanted to deliver and not actually, hopefully, not have as many of those issues. That being said, if you didn't like the Ally before because you already thought it was too expensive for what it was, you're not going to like the Ally X because it's more Ally and it's more expensive. If I had to choose between the Ally, Steam Deck, Steam Deck OLED or the new Ally X, it would 100% be the Ally X. It's just got enough improvements over the original and at a price that I think is reasonable enough to deliver a product that actually now works. And with double the battery capacity and minor changes to the D-pad, it's not just an improved device, it's actually transformed it into something I can use without feeling anxiety about the battery just dying halfway through, but I can actually go online and compete in ranked matches in fighting games using just this handheld and the built-in controls. That makes me really happy. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and watch this video next if you want to learn more about the Ally, Ally X, and especially how the Ally X performs in fighting games using this new D-pad. I've been NihongoGamer. That's all for today. I'll see you real soon.